Imagine you are standing in the middle of a vast, treeless plain. Drop yourself right into the harshest phase of the Ice Age, about 18,000 years ago. Even if you are wearing the most expensive expedition-grade goose-down parka and have chemical warmers stuffed into every pocket, it would not save you. When a 60-mile-per-hour katabatic wind hits you in -40-degree weather, your body heat is stripped away in an instant. You would likely go into cardiac arrest within 30 minutes. Yet, in this absolute frozen hellscape, where not a single tree could grow and no natural caves offered shelter, a specific group of humans did not just survive for a season. They built homes, raised children, and endured the harshest winters on record for thousands of years. Long before Gore-Tex, concrete, or electricity existed, what exactly did they know? We have spent over a century dismissing them as primitive cavemen, but the truth is, they might have been the very first genius engineers in human history. Welcome to Earth Archive, where we dig through the strata of time to uncover the forgotten brilliance of our planet's past. We usually picture Ice Age humans shivering in animal skins, desperately running from predators. But as archaeologists dig deeper, we are realizing that their survival was not just a lucky roll of the evolutionary dice, it was a masterpiece of design. Today, we are going to completely deconstruct the blueprints of the mammoth bone houses built on the Eurasian steppe between 15,000 and 18,000 years ago. We will look at them through the lens of modern thermodynamics, fluid dynamics, and architectural engineering. By the time this video is over, you will realize that the cutting-edge, eco-friendly technologies used in your modern home were actually perfected on a block of ice nearly 20 millennia ago. Are you ready to step into the past? Let us get started. The very first thing we need to do is erase the caveman myth from our minds. Whenever you watch a standard documentary or look at a textbook, you see people huddled around a roaring fire inside a cave. It seems like a logical choice, right? Caves block the wind, the temperature does not fluctuate much, and it keeps the saber-toothed cats out. But if we look at the actual reality of the Ice Age, a cave is an absolute nightmare for long-term survival. Let me explain the science behind it so simply that anyone can understand. First of all, while a cave does have a stable temperature, without a massive heating system, that temperature hovers around 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit. That is better than -40 outside, sure, but sitting completely still in 40 degrees for a 6-month winter is basically torture. Plus, caves are incredibly humid, and humidity is the enemy of survival in the cold. It is a scientific fact that water conducts heat away from the human body 25 times faster than air. While the air in a cave is not pure water, sitting in a heavily damp environment means your heavy leather clothes constantly feel clammy, and breathing thick, moist air into your lungs all day long drains your core temperature far faster than dry air would. You might think, well, just build a bigger fire. And that is exactly where the fatal flaw lies. If you build a massive fire inside a cave without a modern ventilation system, the smoke has nowhere to go. It hits the stone ceiling, cools down, and then rolls right back down to the floor, straight into your lungs. It is the perfect recipe for carbon monoxide poisoning. To live in a cave, you had to choose between freezing in the dark or suffocating in the light. The final nail in the coffin for the cave theory is geography. Caves are stationary, but the food source was not. The primary diet of Ice Age humans consisted of reindeer, bison, and mammoths, and these animals migrated across massive distances seeking grazing lands. If your food moves 100 miles north, you have to pack up and follow it. If you stay anchored to your safe little cave, you will starve to death. Caves were temporary bus stops to wait out a storm, not permanent addresses. So, what is the alternative? You cannot use a cave. There are no sturdy trees to build a cabin. Stone is way too heavy to transport across the tundra. In the middle of this unforgiving frozen plain, how did they create an invisible shield against the deadly cold? The first secret was not about looking up to build a wall. It was about looking down at the ground beneath their feet. The very first thing these Ice Age engineers did was dig. When archaeologists excavate these ancient settlements across Ukraine and Russia, they find that the floors of these dwellings are dug anywhere from 2 to 6 feet below the surface. Do not make the mistake of thinking they were just trying to hide from the wind. There is a massive thermodynamic advantage at play here. They were tapping into geothermal energy. The surface of the Earth is completely at the mercy of the atmosphere, freezing solid at -40 degrees. But the Earth itself acts like a gigantic thermal thermos. It absorbs whatever faint heat the sun provides during the short summer and traps it underground. If you dig just a few feet down using nothing but a shovel made of bone, the temperature of the soil stabilizes. In modern architecture, we bury pipes underground to drastically cut heating costs, a system known as a geothermal heat pump. These ancient humans bypassed the electric pumps and used their bare hands to tap into that exact same principle. They set the baseline temperature of their home not at the freezing ambient air temperature, but at the relatively mild temperature of the insulated Earth. They also applied a brilliant piece of fluid dynamics. Cold air is heavier and denser than warm air, so it sinks. If you pitch a tent on flat ground, the coldest air pools right at the bottom, exactly where you are trying to sleep. But by digging a bowl-shaped depression into the ground and placing a small hearth in the center, something magical happens. The warm air from the fire rises, heating the entire sunken living space. The ambient geothermal heat from the Earth meets the radiant heat from the fire, creating a miraculous greenhouse effect entirely cut off from the frozen hell outside. They did not have textbooks on the laws of thermodynamics, but through trial and error, they learned exactly how to extract and trap the energy of the Earth. To maximize this, they utilized thermal mass. Dirt is incredible at storing heat. During the day, the heat from the hearth would soak into the earthen walls. When the fire died down and the temperature outside plummeted, those earthen walls would slowly radiate that stored heat back into the room. It was a natural, completely electricity-free radiator system. But you might be wondering, if you dig a hole and trap the heat, what happens when you open the door to go outside? Does not the -40-degree wind rush in and ruin everything? They thought of that too. They engineered a cold trap. If you look at the layouts of these ruins, the entrance tunnel is dug slightly lower than the main living floor. Because cold air sinks like water, any freezing air that rushes in through the entrance gets trapped in that lower trench and cannot flow up into the warm living room. It is the exact same invisible fluid dynamic engineering that Inuit builders use when designing the entrance tunnel of an igloo. Now that the foundation is warm, you need a roof. But out on the treeless tundra, your only building materials are the massive skeletons of the mammoths you have hunted. People often assume these ancient humans just gathered whatever bones they could find and threw them into a messy pile. But from a materials science perspective, their choices were flawlessly calculated. Think about a mammoth femur, its thigh bone. One of these bones is thicker and heavier than a grown man's torso. It has immense compressive strength, meaning it can hold up tons of weight without crushing. This acted as their concrete pillar. For the roof, they needed something that could curve and bear the weight of heavy snow without snapping under the pressure of gale-force winds. They used the mammoth tusks. Tusks have incredible tensile strength and flexibility. They act like modern fiberglass or flexible steel beams. They knew exactly which bones possessed which physical properties and placed them perfectly. The true scale of this engineering becomes clear when you look at the Mezhyrich site in Ukraine. To build just one of these primary houses, they used the bones of at least 95 different mammoths. The total weight of the bone structure alone was over 20 tons. Without cranes or dump trucks, working in sub-zero temperatures, they moved and assembled 20 tons of bone. Their construction process was a 3-step masterclass. Step 1 was the foundation. They used heavy, flat mammoth skulls and pelvic bones, driving them into the earth to anchor the house against the wind. Step 2 was the exterior wall. Here, they used mammoth mandibles, or jawbones. They stacked them interlocking tooth to tooth, up to 10 layers high, exactly the way a modern mason lays bricks in a staggered pattern. This interlocking structure ensured that even the most brutal wind could not knock the wall down. Step 3 was the domed roof. They set the heavy femurs vertically and then lashed the naturally curved tusks together at the top. This created an arch and truss system, perfectly distributing the heavy load outward and downward. They were utilizing the physics of the arch over 15,000 years before the Romans used it to build the Colosseum. The most shocking part is the symmetry. When archaeologists map the placement of the bones, the left side of the house is an almost perfect mirror image of the right side in terms of the types and numbers of bones used. You do not get that kind of symmetry by blindly piling up debris. That requires a preconceived blueprint. They knew exactly how many bones they needed and where each one went before they even started building. But a 20-ton bone cage is still full of massive gaps. A skeleton does not stop the wind. If you just throw a single bear skin over the top, the freezing wind will slice right through it, or the skin will freeze solid and shatter. To solve this, they invented the triple layering system, a concept used today by NASA astronauts and Himalayan mountaineers. The innermost layer, the part touching the living space, was made of woven reindeer hide. Reindeer hair is unique because it is hollow. These hollow fibers trap air inside them, creating an incredible thermal barrier that stops body heat from escaping. It is the exact same biological technology we mimic today with synthetic fills like Primaloft. But hide alone is not enough. For the second layer, they packed the gaps between the bones and the inner hide with dried grass, animal fur, and brush. Why? Because the absolute best insulator on Earth is dead airspace. If you can trap air and stop it from moving, it blocks heat transfer entirely. This is why you have double-paned insulated windows in your house and why a vacuum flask keeps your coffee hot. By densely packing grass between the layers, they created a thick sandwich of trapped air. Even if it was -30 outside, a single small fire could keep the inside of that hut at a comfortable 60 degrees Fahrenheit. But then comes the final boss of winter survival. It is not the cold. It is moisture. When a dozen people are breathing, sweating, and cooking inside a sealed dome, it generates a massive amount of steam. If that moisture hits the cold outer wall, it condenses and freezes. Ice is a terrible insulator. The moment the walls of your tent freeze, your insulation is destroyed and your home turns into a meat freezer. To fight this, they introduced their third secret weapon, sphagnum moss. This moss grows in the tundra bogs and acts like a natural sponge, capable of absorbing over 20 times its own weight in water. They packed dried sphagnum moss throughout the insulation layers. As the humans exhaled moisture, the moss absorbed it, completely preventing the walls from freezing over. Furthermore, sphagnum moss is highly acidic and naturally antibacterial, which stopped toxic mold from growing in the dark, damp corners of the house. It trapped the heat while letting the moisture vent. They had literally invented organic Gore-Tex. So you have a geothermally heated floor, a 20-ton bone structure, and a triple-layered, moisture-wicking, insulated wall. You are completely sealed off from the apocalypse outside. But every technological leap brings a new, deadly side effect. By sealing the house so perfectly, they created a gas chamber. If you light a fire in a perfectly sealed, insulated room, it consumes the oxygen in minutes and replaces it with carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide is the silent killer. It is odorless, colorless, and binds to your blood up to 250 times faster than oxygen. You just fall asleep and never wake up. The paradox of insulation is that if you block the cold, you stop the air. If you stop the air, you die. To solve this, they pioneered the stack effect, a fluid dynamics principle used in designing modern skyscrapers. At the very highest point of the domed roof, they left a carefully sized opening, a smoke hole. Because hot air is lighter than cold air, the toxic smoke and excessive heat from the central fire naturally rose up and out through the ceiling. But as that air escapes, it lowers the air pressure inside the house. To equalize the pressure, fresh, oxygen-rich air is automatically pulled in through the tiny gaps in the lower entrance cold trap. Fresh oxygen comes in low, feeds the fire, warms up, and carries the toxins out high. Without a single electric fan, they created a self-sustaining, natural convection ventilation system. The house literally breathed on its own. But what if a blizzard hits? If you leave a hole in your roof, all your precious heat escapes. Archaeological evidence suggests they used a thick leather flap attached to a bone pole to cover this smoke hole. It was a manual damper system. When they were cooking and generating heavy smoke, they opened the flap wide. When it was time to sleep and they needed to trap the heat, they pulled the pole to close the flap or reduce the opening to a sliver. They were actively monitoring and controlling the climate of their home in real time. It was the Stone Age equivalent of a smart thermostat. Now, their bodies were perfectly safe. They had mastered thermodynamics and ventilation. But the most terrifying challenge was yet to come. The winter lasted for 6 months. During the polar night, the sun barely rises. You are trapped inside a 15-foot-wide bone dome with the exact same people for half a year. Outside is certain death. In modern times, we call this cabin fever. Astronauts on the International Space Station and researchers at McMurdo Station in Antarctica undergo intense psychological screening to survive this exact kind of isolation. Without it, the brain begins to crack under the monotony. Cortisol levels spike, immune systems crash, and the sound of someone simply chewing their food can trigger blinding rage. Psychological survival was just as critical as physical survival. How did they keep from losing their minds? They utilized the psychology of space. When researchers take microscopic core samples of the dirt floors in these ruins, they find distinct patterns. The house was strictly divided into functional zones. Zone 1 was the central hearth. This was the community zone, filled with ash and charred bone. It was the only source of light, the place where the family sat in a circle to talk, eat, and maintain their social bonds. Zone 2 was the workstation. Off to the side, archaeologists find massive piles of flint flakes and bone shavings. This was the office. You went there specifically to craft tools and repair clothing. Zone 3, pushed right up against the curved outer wall, was the sleeping quarters, lined with soft furs. No working or cooking happened here. In a tiny, single-room space, if you mix where you eat, sleep, and work, the human brain stays in a state of constant high alert. Many of us learned this the hard way working from home in tiny studio apartments during lockdowns. By giving different patches of dirt specific meanings and rules, these ancient people created invisible walls. They maintained a daily routine and preserved a sense of privacy and order. It was a prehistoric mental health care system. But zoning was not enough to cure 6 months of boredom. So, they utilized one of the greatest survival tools ever invented, art. We have all seen the famous Venus figurines and intricately carved pieces of mammoth ivory from the Ice Age. We tend to view these romantically, thinking these people were expressing their religion or enjoying some leisure time. But from a neuroscientific perspective, this art was a desperate survival mechanism. Outside, the world is chaotic, violent, and completely out of their control. This causes massive feelings of helplessness. But when a hunter sits by the fire and uses a sharp flint blade to scratch thousands of tiny, perfectly spaced geometric lines into a piece of ivory, something shifts in the brain. Engaging in fine, repetitive motor skills induces a state of flow. It shuts down the fear centers of the brain and releases a steady stream of dopamine and serotonin. They could not control the blizzard, but they could absolutely control the shape of that ivory tusk. That sense of agency saved their sanity. Those beautiful carvings were not meant for a museum. They were the world's first natural antidepressants, crafted to keep the darkness out of their minds. They had mastered the earth, the air, the cold, and their own psychology. It is an absolute masterpiece of survival engineering. But this raises a massive mystery. If this mammoth bone architecture was so perfect, why do we not see it today? Why did it seem to vanish from the face of the earth? The answer is climate change. About 12,000 years ago, the glaciers began to retreat. The planet warmed dramatically. The permafrost melted, turning the vast steppes into dense pine forests. And crucially, large animals like the mammoth went extinct on the continents due to these shifting habitats. The rules of the game changed overnight. Why spend weeks hauling 20-ton bones and digging deep pits when you are suddenly surrounded by lightweight, easily workable timber? Because they did not have a written language, architectural knowledge was passed down strictly through practice. When the environment changed and the techniques were no longer needed, the knowledge simply evaporated within a few generations. The blueprints were buried under the dirt, only to be rediscovered a century ago. But did their technology really fail? Not at all. It simply evolved and integrated into the very foundation of modern civilization. If you look closely, the DNA of those ancient engineers is everywhere. The eco-friendly geothermal heat pumps used in the most expensive modern passive houses are doing exactly what the bone shovels did thousands of years ago. The physics of the ivory arch that dispersed the weight of the snow is the exact same math holding up the roof of modern Olympic stadiums and airport terminals. Even the luxury radiant floor heating systems found in high-end modern homes and ancient Roman baths are just a technological refinement of the underground hearths that warmed the frozen dirt of the tundra. Today, disaster relief engineers are intensely studying these Ice Age structures to learn how to build highly efficient off-grid shelters using nothing but local debris. Let us go back to that -40-degree frozen plain. We often look at the past with a sense of superiority, thinking we are so much smarter than our ancestors. Yet modern society panics and freezes when the power grid goes down for a few days. Those ancient people had no electricity, no textbooks, and no steel. Armed with nothing but observation, intuition, and the bones of giants, they conquered the most brutal environment in human history. They figured out how to steal the heat from the earth, how to weave a 3-layered breathable insulation system, and how to harness the pressure of the air to make a house breathe. They were not primitive cavemen. They were humanity's first genius engineers. Their desperate drive to figure out how to stay warm, how to breathe, and how to stay sane laid the groundwork for the modern world we live in today. I hope you enjoyed this journey into the architecture of our ancestors with Earth Archive. It is incredible to realize just how much brilliant science is buried right beneath our feet. If you want to keep exploring the hidden mysteries of our planet's past, please hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and turn on notifications. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing these forgotten stories back to life. In our next video, we are going to tackle the mystery we briefly touched on today. Why exactly did the mammoths and these incredible Ice Age cultures suddenly disappear? Was it just the warming weather, or was it a sudden catastrophic event we are only just beginning to understand? We will dig into that next time. This has been Earth Archive. Thank you so much for watching and stay curious.